The funeral hall was almost silent, save for the soft murmur of distant voices, a ringing reminder that the world had moved on, but Jessica's heart had not. Her trembling hand rested on the cracked, stained classroom desk, a relic of years gone by. Tears slid down her cheeks as she clutched Mr. Thomas's old lesson book to her chest, the weight of it a haunting reminder of all the lessons she had ignored. The room smelled faintly of incense, the soft glow of candles flickering, casting long shadows. The casket stood before her, closed and serene, but it felt as though the world had just dropped its heaviest burden on her shoulders. In this moment, all she could feel was the absence of the man who had tried, perhaps too hard, to pull her out of the darkness. A single tear fell onto the book, the sound of a ticking clock echoing in the stillness. The world around her was moving, but she was stuck in this moment. "You'll understand, one day," the voice echoed in her mind. The flashback was sudden, a wave of memories crashing over Jessica as she stood in the funeral hall. She was no longer just a grieving woman. She was the rebellious high school student who had once stood in front of Mr. Thomas, angry and defensive. He had always tried to reach her, but she had misunderstood. "You're wasting your life," he had shouted that day, his words harsh but rooted in concern. Jessica could still hear the echo of those words ringing in her ears, as if Mr. Thomas were still there, trying to save her from herself. Jessica's mind raced as she flipped through the letters, each one more personal than the last. They were his final attempt to reach her, to pull her from the depths of her self-destructive path. She felt a pang of regret. Mr. Thomas had believed in her, even when she hadn't. His words, written in the margins of the letters, were like a personal message from beyond the grave. Jessica recalled the final meeting with Mr. Thomas, the college interview that had slipped through her fingers. He had arranged it, setting everything up, and she had turned it down. The revelation hit her like a slap in the face, and she felt her heart sink. She had been so close, but her pride had stood in the way. As Jessica turned the last page of the letter, she found the shocking revelation that Mr. Thomas had made a bet with the principal. He had believed she would succeed, even when she didn't. The gamble had been about her future, and somehow, Mr. Thomas had always known her better than she knew herself. His hope had never wavered. As Jessica continued to read through Mr. Thomas's letters, each one felt like a direct message to her, even though he was no longer there. She hadn't realized how much he had seen in her, how deeply he understood her struggles. The words in the letters were more than just advice. They were lifelines, his last attempt to show her the way when she had been lost. In one of the letters, Mr. Thomas had written about the times he had watched her in class, the moments where her potential had shone through despite her defiance. He hadn't given up on her, even when she'd given up on herself. "You will never know how much you mean to the world, Jessica," the letter read. The words were a stark reminder of what she had taken for granted. She closed her eyes for a moment, fighting the tears. How had she not seen it then? Jessica's mind drifted to the past, back to the moments when Mr. Thomas had tried to push her towards something greater. One flashback in particular stood out. He had called her into his office after class, his eyes full of concern. "You've got more in you, Jessica. You're wasting it, and one day you'll regret not taking those chances." She had been defiant, angry at his words. How could he understand? How could anyone understand the mess of her life? But now, reading his letters, Jessica realized that he had been right all along. He saw through her, beyond the layers of rebellion and anger. Mr. Thomas wasn't just a teacher, he was a man who saw potential even when she couldn't see it in herself. His words had never been just criticism. They had been the tough love she had needed but hadn't wanted. Reading further, Jessica came across a letter dated months before Mr. Thomas's passing. It detailed his final attempt to guide her. He had arranged an interview for her at a prestigious college, something that could have changed everything. Jessica had never known about the interview, nor the lengths Mr. Thomas had gone to make sure she had a chance to leave behind the life she had been stuck in. She had dismissed the idea as unimportant at the time. Her life had been a series of bad choices, and the thought of a bright future had seemed foreign. Now, as she read his words, she felt the weight of her missed opportunity. He had believed in her, even when she didn't. The guilt washed over her in waves, and the realization hit hard. She had never fully appreciated the extent to which Mr. Thomas had sacrificed for her. The final letter she found was the most personal, written just days before Mr. Thomas's passing. In it, he confessed something Jessica had never known. He had made a bet with the principal, one that was about her future. The bet was simple. He believed that one day she would succeed, despite everything. The principal had laughed, but Mr. Thomas had been unwavering. "She will surprise us all," he had written. Jessica couldn't believe it. Even in his final days, Mr. Thomas had placed his faith in her, betting on her potential when she had been too lost to see it herself. The realization struck Jessica deeply. He had fought for her when she couldn't fight for herself. And now, with him gone, all she had left were these letters, his final words of hope and belief. As Jessica put down the last letter, the weight of everything Mr. Thomas had done for her became overwhelming. She hadn't realized how much he had cared, how deeply he had believed in her. The anger she had felt toward him seemed so trivial now, so misplaced. She could feel the depth of his hope, his faith, and his quiet determination to see her succeed. But it was too late now. He was gone, and all she had left were his letters. Jessica stared at the letters, her emotions swirling. Anger, guilt, and a newfound determination. She wasn't sure what she could do with all this now, but one thing was clear. She wasn't going to let his belief in her be in vain. She would find a way to honor his legacy, to prove that he had been right. The confrontation was inevitable. Jessica had been carrying the weight of her guilt for weeks, and now it was time to face the one person who might have the answers she was searching for. The principal. As she walked into his office, the walls lined with diplomas and achievements seemed to mock her. The principal, an older man with a stern face and a cold demeanor, looked up from his desk, surprised to see her. "Jessica," he said, his voice clipped. "What can I do for you?" The words felt empty, detached, as if he had long ago stopped caring about the students who once walked through his door. Jessica stood there for a moment, gathering her courage. She couldn't let the opportunity slip by like all the others. "I need to know about Mr. Thomas," she said, her voice steady but firm. "What did he really believe in? What was it he saw in me?" The principal's eyes darkened, and for a moment, Jessica saw a flicker of something, regret? Or maybe just the burden of truth. The principal leaned back in his chair, folding his hands together as he considered her question. For a long moment he didn't speak, and Jessica felt the weight of the silence press down on her. Finally he spoke, his tone low. "Mr. Thomas was a man of conviction," he began, choosing his words carefully. "He believed in his students, even when they didn't believe in themselves. But you were different. He saw potential in you, Jessica, even when you pushed him away, even when you ran from it." Jessica swallowed hard, the principal's words sinking in deeper than she had expected. She had spent years thinking Mr. Thomas had been too hard on her, but now she was beginning to see things differently. "Why didn't he give up on me?" she asked quietly, her voice trembling with emotion. The principal's gaze softened for a moment, a flicker of sympathy crossing his face. "Because he knew you could be more," he said simply. "He made a bet on you. He always believed in you." The principal's words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Jessica couldn't believe what she was hearing. Mr. Thomas had made a bet with the principal? She had always thought of him as just a teacher who pushed her too hard, but now she saw that there had been something deeper, a belief in her that she had never understood. "What do you mean he made a bet?" she asked, her voice breaking slightly. The principal leaned forward, his expression becoming more intense. "He bet that one day you would rise above your circumstances, that you would succeed despite everything. He believed that you had the power to change your life, and he was willing to stake his reputation on it." Jessica felt a rush of emotions, anger, disbelief, and something else. Shame. She had never known about this bet, and now it seemed like the most important thing Mr. Thomas had ever done for her. "Why didn't he tell me?" she whispered, her voice filled with hurt. "He didn't have to," the principal replied. He knew you needed to find your own way. He believed you would. As the conversation continued, Jessica's emotions began to overwhelm her. She had never imagined that Mr. Thomas had believed in her so fiercely, so unconditionally. The anger she had felt toward him seemed childish now, and the guilt settled deeper into her chest. "I should have listened," she murmured, her voice almost inaudible. "I should have tried harder." The principal's expression softened. "You were young," he said quietly. "And Mr. Thomas knew that. He knew that you would have to come to this realization on your own." The words hung in the air, and Jessica could feel the weight of her past decisions pressing down on her. "He was dying, wasn't he?" she asked suddenly, her voice trembling. The principal nodded slowly, his gaze shifting to the floor. "Yes, he was. He pushed you because he knew time was running out. He wanted to leave you with something to carry you forward." Jessica's heart clenched. She had never known. Mr. Thomas had fought for her when she hadn't been able to fight for herself. With the truth laid bare, Jessica stood up, her legs shaky beneath her. She felt as though she had been freed and trapped all at once. She had known that she had disappointed Mr. Thomas, but she hadn't realized the extent to which he had believed in her, or the sacrifices he had made for her. She felt an overwhelming sense of loss, regret for the things she hadn't done, for the words she hadn't said, for the chances she had missed. "I never knew," she whispered, more to herself than to the principal. "I never knew how much he cared." The principal gave a small understanding nod. "He cared more than you'll ever know, but now it's up to you to make it count." Jessica stood there for a moment longer, the weight of the conversation settling into her bones. "I will," she said finally, her voice steady. "I'll make it count." And with that, she turned and walked out of the office, determined to honor Mr. Thomas's belief in her. Weeks passed, but Jessica couldn't shake the weight of the conversation she'd had with the principal. She spent her days mulling over the past, replaying every moment she had shared with Mr. Thomas. The harsh words, the missed opportunities, the unspoken regrets. The guilt gnawed at her constantly. She found herself thinking of all the times she had pushed him away, believing that his tough love was too much to bear. But now, looking back, she saw it differently. His words had never been a condemnation. They had been a challenge. He had wanted her to rise, to break free from the cycle she had been caught in. And she had let it slip away. Her thoughts drifted to the day she had turned down the college interview. She could almost hear his voice in her head, urging her not to make the same mistake again. "You were given a chance, Jessica," she whispered to herself, her heart heavy with regret. "And I blew it." Jessica found herself standing at the same high school grounds where she had once felt so out of place. The familiar sights, the worn-out benches, the cracked pavement, now felt different, like a distant memory. She had returned to visit Mr. Thomas's memorial, the small plaque they had placed in his honor. It was a quiet spot, tucked behind the school, far from the bustling crowds of students. As she knelt before the plaque, she traced her fingers over the engraved words, "A teacher who never gave up." The tears came slowly at first, then in quiet waves. "I never got the chance to thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the rustling leaves. "You believed in me, even when I couldn't believe in myself." The wind stirred, and she could almost imagine Mr. Thomas standing beside her, offering the kind of silent encouragement he had always given. Days turned into weeks, and Jessica began to feel the weight of the decisions she had to make. She had promised herself she would make it count, but the path forward seemed unclear. She had reapplied to college, and though she felt more determined than ever, doubt still lingered. What if she failed again? What if she wasn't enough? The fear clawed at her, threatening to undo all the progress she had made. But she knew that she couldn't let that happen. Mr. Thomas had believed in her, and now it was time for her to believe in herself. Late one evening, while sorting through old textbooks, she found a note that Mr. Thomas had left in the margin of one of her assignments. "Don't fear the struggle. It's part of the process." His words felt like a beacon, guiding her through the uncertainty. She couldn't waste any more time wondering what could have been. She had to keep moving forward, for herself, and for him. Jessica's phone buzzed on the desk, interrupting her thoughts. She picked it up to see an email notification. It was from the college. Her heart skipped a beat as she opened the message, her hands trembling. There it was in bold text. "Congratulations, Jessica. You've been accepted." She blinked, unsure if she had read it correctly. She read it again. And again. Nah. The realization hit her all at once. She had done it. She had made it. Tears welled up in her eyes as she sat back in her chair, a feeling of disbelief mixing with joy. It was the first step, the moment she had been waiting for, but it felt like so much more. This wasn't just an acceptance letter, it was a victory over her past, a testament to the belief that Mr. Thomas had placed in her. As the tears spilled down her face, she whispered, "Thank you. I won't let you down." In the weeks that followed, Jessica threw herself into her studies and her new life with an intensity she had never known before. She felt the weight of Mr. Thomas's belief in her, and she refused to let it go to waste. But it wasn't just about academic success, it was about something deeper. Jessica knew she wanted to help others the way Mr. Thomas had helped her. She began to reach out to troubled students, offering guidance and support in the way she wished she had received when she was younger. Slowly but surely, she began to create a mentorship program for at-risk youth, a legacy in Mr. Thomas's honor. It was the beginning of something bigger than herself, and she knew in her heart that this was what she had been meant to do all along. Jessica sat at her desk, papers spread out in front of her, her mind racing with the possibilities of the future. The weight of the college acceptance letter still hung in her hands, but now it was just a part of the new reality she had built for herself. Every late night, every sacrifice, had led her here. But despite all of her progress, there was still one thing that weighed on her, her desire to make up for the time lost. The college years, the opportunities, and the guidance she had rejected in the past. All of it had left her with a deep yearning to do more. As the days went by, she immersed herself in her studies, but the guilt never fully dissipated. It wasn't just about academics, it was about building a legacy, about showing the world that Mr. Thomas's belief in her wasn't in vain. She needed to prove to herself, and to him, that she could live up to the potential he had always seen in her. This journey wasn't just hers anymore, it was a testament to his faith. It had been a month since the acceptance letter, and Jessica felt more determined than ever to stay on track. But it wasn't just about the grades or the classes. It was about using her past as a foundation for a future that could impact others. She had begun reaching out to schools and youth programs offering mentorship and guidance. Slowly but surely, her efforts were starting to take root. She had a vision now, a plan to make sure the lessons Mr. Thomas had taught her were passed on to the next generation. She knew that his legacy couldn't be contained in just one person, and that the true measure of his belief in her would be how she paid it forward. Jessica began organizing a series of workshops for at-risk students, using her own experience to guide them toward brighter futures. The fear of failure was still there, but the more she worked, the more it began to fade. For the first time, she felt like she was where she was supposed to be. The more Jessica mentored, the more she realized how much she had to give. Her own experiences, her mistakes, her regrets, had become the foundation for the advice she gave to others. Each time she spoke with a student, she saw a little of herself in them, the same doubts, the same struggles. But she also saw the possibility for change, the opportunity to break free. One afternoon, a young girl named Emily stayed after the workshop. "I never thought I could do it," Emily said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But after hearing you, I feel like maybe I can." Jessica smiled warmly, feeling the weight of her journey come full circle. "You can," she said firmly, her voice filled with conviction. "You just need to believe in yourself." Emily's face lit up with a spark of hope, and Jessica knew, in that moment, that she had done more than just teach. She had helped someone believe in themselves the way Mr. Thomas had helped her believe in hers. Jessica's efforts began to pay off in ways she had never expected. Her mentorship program was growing, and she was being asked to speak at local schools and community events. She was finally using her past for something good, and with each person she helped, she felt a little bit lighter. The more students she mentored, the more she realized how powerful her own story could be. She wasn't just teaching academic lessons. She was showing them that transformation was possible, that change could come from within. But there was one thing she hadn't expected: her own personal growth. As she mentored, she began to heal from her own past, slowly letting go of the guilt that had haunted her for years. She no longer felt like a victim of her circumstances. She was a survivor, and she had the power to create a better future for herself and for others. Jessica's new life was no longer defined by the mistakes of the past. She had rebuilt herself, brick by brick, with the help of those who had believed in her, especially Mr. Thomas. The legacy she was creating wasn't just about academic success. It was about resilience, about never giving up, and about using the struggles of the past as stepping stones for the future. One afternoon, as she sat in her office, preparing for another session, Jessica looked out the window, a small smile forming on her lips. For the first time in years, she felt at peace with where she was. She had done it. She had turned her life around, and in doing so, she had given others the tools to do the same. The sound of a knock at the door broke her reverie, and she stood up, ready to continue her work, ready to change another life. It had been several months since Jessica's journey had truly begun to take shape. The weight of her past had started to fade, replaced by a renewed sense of purpose. She had successfully navigated the challenges of her first semester in college, but there was still one thing left to do. She had to face the people who had watched her struggle, her old classmates, the ones who hadn't seen her potential the way Mr. Thomas had. They had written her off as just another lost cause, someone who would never amount to anything. Now, standing in front of the classroom, Jessica felt the weight of their expectations on her shoulders. She wasn't sure what she was expecting to find, but as she walked past the familiar desks, she saw the faces of her former classmates. Some of them still remembered her, some had forgotten. But for the first time, Jessica didn't care. She was here to prove something, not to them, but to herself. It was time for her first real test. Standing in front of the class, Jessica could feel her heart pounding, but she steadied herself. She took a deep breath and began to speak. "When I was your age, I was lost," she said, her voice strong yet vulnerable. "I didn't understand what I was capable of, and I rejected the help I was offered. But one person saw something in me that I couldn't see in myself." She paused for a moment, her gaze sweeping over the room, making eye contact with a few students. "That person was my teacher, Mr. Thomas. He believed in me when I didn't believe in myself, and because of him, I'm here today. I didn't waste the second chance he gave me." Jessica's voice cracked slightly as she finished, the weight of her emotions rising to the surface. She wasn't just sharing her story, she was honoring the man who had made it all possible. The words had been hard to say, but they had been necessary. As Jessica finished her talk, she felt a quiet pride in herself, a sense of accomplishment that was both humbling and empowering. But it was the students' reactions that told her everything she needed to know. There was a shift in the room. The looks of skepticism had been replaced with quiet interest, some students nodding along, others taking notes. Jessica had not just shared her story. She had given them a glimpse of what was possible. After class, a few students approached her, eager to talk. "Your story. It really made me think," one of them said. "I didn't realize how much potential I was just letting slip by." Jessica smiled, the feeling of making a difference washing over her. "You have it in you," she said simply. "All you need to do is believe in yourself." It was a lesson Mr. Thomas had taught her, and now she was passing it on. Weeks passed, and Jessica continued her journey, not just as a student but as a mentor. She had established her own program, using the lessons Mr. Thomas had instilled in her to help guide others. She spent time with students who had been through similar struggles, offering them the support and guidance that she had once rejected. Her past mistakes no longer felt like weights, they had become the foundation for her new path. But there was still something missing, something she had yet to fully embrace. Jessica had never fully healed from the loss of Mr. Thomas. She thought about him every day, remembering his stern words, his quiet encouragement, and the faith he had placed in her. One evening, As she sat in her office, she looked at the photo of him that she had kept on her desk. The realization hit her. Mr. Thomas hadn't just been a teacher. He had been a guiding light, a force that had shaped her destiny. And it was time for her to honor that legacy fully. Jessica stood at the edge of the school grounds, looking out at the students as they walked by, unaware of the profound change that had taken place within her. She had done it. She had turned her life around, not just for herself, but for the people who needed her the most. The mentorship program was thriving, and her influence was growing. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the field, Jessica felt a deep sense of peace. Mr. Thomas had once said, "The only limits are the ones you place on yourself." She understood those words now. She had faced her past, and in doing so, she had built a future that was hers to shape. The journey wasn't over. It had only just begun. She looked up at the sky, a sense of gratitude and purpose filling her heart. She had a legacy to continue, and she was ready. Jessica stood in front of the classroom, her heart racing as she prepared to speak to a new group of students. It was the first day of her own class. She was a teacher now. It felt surreal, a full circle from where she had once sat as a student, lost and uncertain. Her hands gripped the lectern as she looked out at the young faces before her. "I used to be like you," she began, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "I was lost, unsure of who I was or what I could become. But one person believed in me when I couldn't believe in myself. And that's why I'm here today, to help you see the same potential that he saw in me." Jessica paused for a moment, her gaze drifting to the window where the sunlight poured through, illuminating the room. "We all have a choice," she continued, "to rise above our past, to become who we are meant to be." The words felt powerful coming from her own lips, a realization that her journey had led her here, to this moment. The semester was only just beginning, but Jessica had already seen the impact of her words. One student in particular, a quiet young man named Alex, had started staying after class to ask questions. At first he barely spoke to anyone, keeping to himself, but as Jessica encouraged him to open up, she saw a change. One afternoon, Alex approached her hesitantly. "I didn't know someone could believe in me the way you believe in us," he said, his voice shaky. Jessica smiled, her heart swelling with pride. "I believe in you because I see the same potential that was once in me," she replied. "Don't let anyone, including yourself, tell you that you can't achieve something." Alex nodded slowly, a look of determination crossing his face. For Jessica, it was a moment of clarity. This was why she had become a teacher, to pass on the gift of belief that Mr. Thomas had once given her. Months passed, and Jessica continued to pour her heart into her work, teaching not just the curriculum, but life lessons she had learned through her own struggles. One evening, after a particularly challenging class, Jessica sat alone in her office, her thoughts turning inward. As she reflected on the journey that had brought her here, she realized how much she had grown. She had healed, not just from the pain of her past, but from the guilt that had once consumed her. She had found her purpose. Her phone buzzed with a message from a former student. Emily, the same girl who had once told her she didn't think she could succeed. "Thank you," the message read. "I got into college." Tears filled Jessica's eyes as she read the words. Emily had done it. Jessica had made a difference. In that moment, she knew she was exactly where she was meant to be. It was a sunny afternoon, and Jessica stood outside her classroom, watching the students as they filed out for the day. The school was alive with activity, but for Jessica, everything felt quieter, more serene. She had made a promise to herself years ago that she would use her second chance to help others find theirs. And now she was doing just that. As she watched the students leave, she realized that Mr. Thomas had not just saved her life, he had set her on a path that would allow her to change the lives of countless others. She thought of him often, and in those quiet moments she would smile, knowing that his belief in her had been the foundation for everything she had accomplished. "You were right, Mr. Thomas," she whispered to herself. "I finally understand." Jessica stood in front of her class one final time, her heart full as she looked at the students who had walked alongside her during this transformative journey. They had learned from her, but she had learned just as much from them. It wasn't just about the lessons in the textbooks, it was about resilience, growth, and the power of believing in yourself. As the bell rang, signaling the end of the day, Jessica felt a sense of peace settle over her. She had found her purpose, and it was to teach, to mentor, to help others discover their own potential. She smiled as she looked out the window, knowing that this was only the beginning. "You were right, Mr. Thomas," she thought, her heart full. "I finally understand."